Carrollton and Broadview Heights, and a little piece of Homestead Township that I share with my friend Representative Chris Glassburn, who has that area that sort of wraps up around. Chris, say hi.
Hello.
And then
Falls, or
yeah,
Township, the rest of the township.
Yeah.
And
What else do you cover?
Middleburg, Brook Park, North Homestead, and southwest city of Cleveland.
Very good. Well, thanks for being here. Makes our event bipartisan from a member perspective, as well as I'm sure from other folks in the room as well. And then our star here today, who will have a lot more time, with Representative David Thomas from Ashtabula County, former auditor out there. And where do you cover, David?
So I cover the 65th district, which is Ashtabula and Trumbull. It's all the rural parts of Boca.
So I like to do town halls like this for major issues that come up. So the first time I started this effort back in 2011, when I was a brand new freshman rep for the first time and 14 years younger than I am now, I did one on the budget, and I was just joking with Ken McEntee. It was on a snowy Monday evening in Strongsville, and I had one reporter and like 5 people show up. So I'm really happy to have turnout today. We didn't know what to expect in the way of attendance. So thanks for being here, first of all. This is really designed to be a question and answer session, primarily with David and myself. But David's our real expert on this issue, having been a county auditor, having now serving as the Ways and Means Vice Chairman. That's the Tax Writing Committee of the Ohio House of Representatives, and is just super knowledgeable about all of this. But I wanted to hold this to focus attention on what I think was the issue that we heard the most about at the local level during the recent campaign for our legislative seats. You know, outside of a secure border, and why are my eggs $6 a dozen, and can you do something about inflation generally? These are like the broad national issues that we heard about. Property tax reform in this state was really the main local issue and state issue that was brought to our attention at, in my case, about 15,000 doors that we knocked down during the course of the 2024 campaign. I'm sure these gentlemen each were at a similar number as they were going through that process. And so I like to try to hold these types of events to allow folks to have a forum, to ask questions, and frankly to vent in some ways on some of these things. And just to let you all know, we hear you, we're listening. This is a topic that is on the radar for the legislature this time around, and is going to be addressed in some form or another. And I think the form is probably going to be in a number of small bills rather than one giant bill to try to reform this policy issue. We didn't get here quickly, and we won't get out of this easily in terms of what the burden is and how the state and local shares sort of interplay with one another, and the challenges that we're confronting as a state. I want to allow David an opportunity, since we're sort of, we build ourselves together as part of this, and we're both BW grads, incidentally, so we welcome you back to BW. I did my undergrad here. Dave was here for his MBA a few years after me. But with that, I know you've got some things you want to share in terms of what's going through Ways and Means, bills that have been introduced. I have one of them that's been introduced already, House Bill 40, which is related to 100% disabled veterans, increasing the exemption for that. But there are a number of other bills that David's committee is hearing or is going to hear over the next number of months. Certainly while we're in session, before we wrap up and go out for the summer when the budget is finished at the end of June. So, Representative, thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Maria.
Thank you guys for being here. You don't have to sit down. You're right up here too. So you have a great representative. Not too many folks, frankly, in the legislature do town halls or do public things like this. So it's always really nice when people are going to do that. So definitely keep up your conversations with Dovilla. So David Thomas from Ashtabula County, cover Ashtabula and Trumbull County. Representative Dovilla said, been an auditor for about 6 years prior to starting the legislature just about 44 days ago or so. So still very new. I, as auditor, first day in office, moved my desk to our front hallway. That way when people were paying their taxes or they were there, they came right in and talked to me. Everyone in my county had my cell phone. I had a little over 100 of these types of town halls and education sessions, just because I think the more information the taxpayers have, the better. Love the job, love what we were doing at the county level, but there's only so many times you can say contact your state rep to change policy before you want to be that state rep and help with the policy. So that's why I'm the legislature. Ways and Means is the committee on the House side that handles tax policy. So this is definitely, I would say this Energy, which we can also talk about because energy dives into part of this issue as well. And then the budget are the three big priorities for this year. I can tell you right off the bat why did nothing happen over the last 2 years. If any of you know anything about the legislature over the last 2 years, it's a miracle, frankly, that anything happened, given all the different craziness that we can talk about later if you'd like. So what did happen, though, there was a large review of essentially the system. There's a large number of recommendations that came out of that review, and then now it's kind of our job to actually get that over the finish line. As Dovilla said, we could do one large kind of omnibus bill on all tax policy, have everything stuffed in there. You would have actually probably no idea really what's in there, and it would be likely a 2-year process because you would have every single one of the folks that are against it coming out and slowing it down. So instead, the strategy will be quite a number of targeted single issue bills so that you can actually, 1, read them and understand them, 2, we can move those faster and fast track them, and then 3, we'll be able to actually see the progress as it happens. Now, I know it's already February 15th. You're probably asking, well, why haven't we passed anything yet? We just actually started hearing bills in terms of committees and testimony last week. So that first month is usually organizational, but the second month we usually just start to introduce. With the budget happening at the exact same time, a lot of the focus is on the budget first. The current plan is to not have these bills being placed into the budget. One of the reasons for that is kind of what I just shared. Having it outside the budget means it's much more of a transparent process. Any of you actually can come down and testify at any time for any bill that you'd like. And I would definitely encourage that. That's one of my takeaways that we can have. We can also show you how to track bills too. So that way people can actually come, they can speak directly to that specific bill that impacts them. And a lot of this process, this aspect of tax policy, you all here in Cuyahoga, your issues are actually somewhat different than my issues in Ashtabula in terms of what's caused some of the increases in Ashtabula versus what's caused some of the issues here in Cuyahoga. And I can tell you, introduced one bill on Wednesday that I've been nonstop on the phone with superintendents and school treasurers yesterday, the day before. And based on the impact of that bill, the school treasurers and superintendents were very specific in where they were in the state because that's where it impacted. So happy really to dive into anything that you'd like to ask questions about or learn more about. This is not a straightforward process or aspect. There are much more straightforward tax policies out there. There's also much better things about them and then much worse things about them too. So the first step is what you're doing, which is educating yourself, and that's really one of the most important pieces to, because property taxes in the sense are the most democratic form, before you vote, before you know what's happening, actually taking time and learning. So appreciate you being here. We're happy to answer any questions. I know there's a lot of questions before that I kind of touched on. Many of you are familiar because I've been helping other new state reps as well, with this process of learning, understanding, helping to educate too. But what can I help? Yes.
I think one of the main problems is with the assessed value and appraised value. Can you tell everybody the difference between the appraised value and the assessed value? Because everybody's all concerned about everything going through the roof.
Yep. So property taxes were here before we had a constitution, in a sense. It's the very basic foundational form, which is also why I think it's the most convoluted, because we've been just layering and pulling out and adding and then exempting and then doubling. So that's one of the reasons. Way back in the day, essentially, all taxation was based on what you own. Now, all voting was also based on what you own too. I don't think, or we discussed it, going back to that model either. But the values of the property are essentially the market value. What is the belief of what you could actually sell that property for? That's the market value of the property. Back during one of the last inflationary periods where things went through the roof, we as the legislature, before even our grandparents were born, decided we're going to change the actual market value we can sell the property for, and we're going to apply the tax rate to something called the assessed value, or 35% of what that market value is. So you all, I am, taxed not on what we can actually sell the property for, but on 35% of what we can sell the property for. which is the assessed value. Now that saves money, it makes things more complicated, but it saves money in that sense. And that was one short-term attack probably back in the 20s or the 30s to decrease the property tax burden, which is to say, okay, we won't apply the tax rate anymore to your full market value, we'll just make it an assessed value. So there are things that we do in the short term as a legislature that helps right then, but then down the road makes things worse and more complicated, and it impacts things that we didn't necessarily think about when we were trying to give direct help right then. So the market value wise, those updates are done every 6 years. That's a full revaluation where, and every auditor does things differently. That's one of the other downsides of Ohio, frankly. We love our local governments typically. We've got, 1,300 townships. We've got 1,200 municipalities. We've got almost 6,000 taxing districts. We love having that person locally that we know and voting on certain things. But it stacks up and it adds. If you go out west, I'll pick up right to you.
When you're done.
Yeah. If you go out west, Arizona, some of your newer states, there's just things based on counties. Or Tennessee, North Carolina, there's things based on counties, not at the super local level. There's goods and bads with that too. But every auditor does things a little bit differently in terms of how they value property. In Dovilla, I always believed in viewing visibly every single property. And so we would look at all 82,000 parcels every 6 years, see where changes in the market happened, and then we would move values based on what's happening with the market. In your 3-year updates, which I can't remember if Kyle is a full triennial or if it's a 6-annual, the full revale. Six? Okay. So I heard both. But in the other version, it's a 6. So in the version that you all just went through to affect tax bills with, essentially the county is valuing property based on that individual property. So it's based off of what is the status of that property, what's happened with that property over the last 6 years, what's been happening in the real estate market over the last 6 years, which I can tell you is quite a bit. And then I'm also educating our lawmakers too. This, in terms of the value side, in the real estate market, my last year's auditor, we had an update in 23, payable then 24. What transfers we were seeing in the office, because auditors also see the property transfers, we would track them. What was our new value from 23, and then what was that property selling for in 24? At least in Ashtabula, we were seeing on average a 20 to 25% increase. Essentially, that the property was selling 20 to 25% higher than what the value was. So I'm telling you all too that this problem isn't going away; it's actually getting much worse. So when we look at the value side, just like sales tax, I joke with people, someone should create an app where you can track how much sales tax you're actually spending, and then you can see at the end of the year how much did I actually contribute to the county and to the state in sales tax. Because you don't see it. You don't know. You just pay your bill, and then you forget about how much you actually pay. Income tax, who actually does their own income taxes? I do. Most people don't. You all do. Okay, good. You're good. You're not necessarily seeing that very transparent. Property tax is one of the only taxes where you're actually set a bill. You can theoretically see the breakout in terms of where all that money's going, and then you're seeing the difference, and you're noticing. That's good, but that can also be improved upon too. Long answer to say what's market versus assessed. That's a little preference. She was first, and then I continue. Yeah.
Okay, yes, I just wanted to put it out there that we should start looking at this from the local level up. When you introduce the group, I'm a city council person in Berea, and this is my district. I had no idea about this program to let the people of my district know about this conversation. And I think if you can recognize the people who are here at the local level, and not just the state and the Republican party, then...
Well, Erica, the member state next to you is a Democrat, so...
well, no, it's not partisan. It's not partisan.
Which is why I introduced him first.
What's that?
Which is why I introduced him first.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Oh, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, I apologize.
Everybody, this is Erica Noble, the councilwoman for Ward 4 for Berea, which you're now seated.
I apologize.
We now handle that.
My point isn't that. It's just that really, I think we should start discussing at the local level from the bottom up as opposed to the top down, so that we can really communicate with each other the issues that all of us are seeing on our tax bill. Many of us who own a home. Because I think there is a lack of transparency and understanding, like, for example, we didn't know it was a 3-year or a 6-year. And our speaker doesn't also know it's okay. I'm not saying it's a problem and it's not really a complaint, but I'm seeing that as a city council person who's engaged at the local level, who attends meetings and has community meetings, that there's just a lack of information sharing, and I hope that we can work on that.
That's a great point. Every county is a little bit different. There are, technically, and this is something that will be changed, technically, there is no advance notice required for property value updates. Technically, the bill is actually the notice that your value changed. Now, most counties believe in doing a lot of advance work, a lot of information. I sent a good number of postcards, held a good number of outreach, social media ads, all the different things. Other counties, 0.
No.
So imagine just getting your tax bill and not realizing. Now, Cuyahoga, I know is a little bit, you guys are a little bit unique too, just because of your size and how big. I believe that Mike did some town halls, different things last year too. But that information piece is quite a chunk. And imagine, this will be it also, imagine how many of you escrow your tax bill through your mortgage? 1, 2, 3, 4. So I actually encourage people not to. Handful of reasons why. One, you don't actually see what your tax bill is. Typically, you're not sent your tax bill. That will be a change as well. But you're just seeing your escrow, which is typically a year behind. And usually, your escrow actually is almost double what your tax increase was because they're catching you up. So I always encourage folks not to do that. If you do, put it off your tax bill first. That way, you're actually seeing your breakouts and differences. Same thing if there's any landlords here. Give your tax bill for that property to your renter. That way they see it, they see the breakout, and as part of their rent, tell them how much is their tax payment. Just because I think education, and the more that we can share that out, the better, because renters do pay property taxes, just not directly. And so they're voting, which we like voting, but they may not necessarily be seeing the full impact or knowledge of what they're voting on. Good question.
This past December, we had Chief Justice Sharon Kennedy come out and speak with us in Parma, and she reminded us of the DeRolf decision.
Yep.
Most of our property taxes go to fund the schools, and the Ohio Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. So what's happening in the State House to fix it? The Ohio Supreme Court told the House and Senate to fix it, okay? Now, since then, we've had multiple representatives representing us. Nothing's been fixed. Democrats, Martin Sweeney, Dale Miller, Nan Baker, Marvin Ilnowski, nobody's fixed it.
So Doris,
Can we have our property taxes taken up, property taxes eliminated and have our schools funded through sales taxes around the state or some other way? I was just told that Senate or House Bill 15 proposes 100% property tax exemption for power plants instead of seniors.
So John Plushtick is actually wrong on that, and I can explain why.
But my first question was, what's being done
Yeah, I can back
since
let me
1995?
provide a little history on that, because there is, I said this at my office hours earlier, so Billy, you can give this place and those who were there. There is a broad misunderstanding of the DeRolf decisions and the fallout from it. The DeRolf cases were composed actually of 3 different cases that came before the Ohio Supreme Court in the 90s, and I think in the early 2000s. Those holdings declared overuse of property tax as unconstitutional. Not property tax generally being used for school funding is unconstitutional. So that's the first point that's important for folks to understand. Because when folks bring up that it's still something that hasn't been resolved, it's factually incorrect. It has been resolved since then. In fact, we're on several formulas since the DeRolf determinations were made 25 years ago that have changed school funding. So that's really an art at this point. It's just not an accurate argument anymore. We're on several school funding formulas beyond that the courts have not declared unconstitutional. Now, to the second piece of it, whether or not we want to continue to use property tax as a form or revenue for the schools is the other matter. The thing I pointed out earlier at our other event is something I'll share here as well. We have common public schools in this state because the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 indicated that we're going to have them. I support public schools, I'm a product of public schools, and we're going to have public schools in Ohio. Now, the fact that we have 611 districts and 88 counties, as opposed to 65 districts and 65 counties in Florida, and the funding mechanism that we have, these are questions that we need to, as a state, have a conversation on and make a determination of. But we're not going to not fund public schools. Because that is the logical conclusion of the argument that I hear about, well, we can't use taxes for this. We're going to fund our public schools, and we should have a civic dialogue as citizens in this state about how we're going to do that. So if we think that we can get it done in the form of sales taxes or income taxes or other revenue streams, that's fine. But just know that you can't squeeze the tube of toothpaste here without squirting out the other end there. David, you may have
to add to what Alex here. The idea is that every student should be getting some type of quality education. Now, if you're a student in a super wealthy area, or if you're a student in East Cleveland, not to pick on East Cleveland, but that's the one now, you should have an equal opportunity or equal access, I guess, to education. And DeRolf said essentially, East Cleveland kid, because you're from East Cleveland, and we rely a majority on property taxes to educate you, you're getting a much worse education and less opportunity than a kid in a wealthy school district. And so since then, the most recent rendition is the Cup-Patterson fair funding formula. John Patterson, former state rep, he actually was 30 seconds for me. That modified, we actually use state revenues towards our local students and what we spend per pupil. So now we look at essentially what can local districts generate in terms of what's their wealth on their income side and then their property side, and then how much is the rest, and what portion of that is state sales tax and state income tax covered. So student in East Cleveland, it's I want to say $30,000 to $35,000 per student that our state revenues are paying for it. Obviously their property tax is paying next to nothing. Student in a much more wealthy area, the state may be chipping in $2,000 to $3,000 per student, and those local communities are paying much more at the local level to fund for each student. So that is essentially, and that gets at the constitutional question. Now, Cup-Patterson has never been challenged constitutionally, but the issue of how we're actually treating students. Now, to back away and go to your second question, we could, and we talked about this earlier, we could fund public schools tomorrow on no property tax. We could do sales schools. Well, you're really thinking where I'm going. So, how much do you think the lottery contributes, or actually profit-wise, how much do you think the lottery contributes? What do you think? 5%. It's about $1 billion. So the lottery contributes in terms of state revenue, about $1 billion. That's a huge number. Now, how much do you think we're spending just from state sales tax and state income tax on K through 12 education? About $13 to $14 billion. And that's not including the property tax side. That's just our state income tax and our state sales tax. So the lottery contributes, but it's not near that number. So there's that piece of it. Now, local schools can use a school district income tax and move their property tax away from revenue from the property owner, and they could supplement it by having an income tax. That's about 25% of our schools currently have an income tax. Now, same thing with your county and with your city. Cities, villages have income tax that they can supplement, pull off property taxes completely. Counties, you all though have the highest sales tax in the state, but counties can actually move away from their property taxes and fund out the sales tax line. If we were to move the property tax side at a statewide from school funded by property tax at the local level to sales tax, we would likely be looking at, because that number at the property tax level is right around $13 billion as well, it's about even. And because our current sales tax generates right about $12 billion or so, and of course, the more you raise sales tax, the less you're going to be getting because there's offsets, we would likely be looking at a 10 to 15% sales tax.
Statewide, before the local add-ons.
Yes. And that would take away, unfortunately, some of that local control. You would be spending your money, collecting sales tax, sending it down to us, and we would be deciding how that gets dispersed and distributed and spent all across the state. There's more efficiencies there, but there's a lot less local control. So there's trade-offs, but that is an option. And then your third point, real quick, House Bill 15. Another warning to you, because I say this in front of every group I can make. Last year, auctions, and Representative Glassburn is the vice chair for our ranking member for our energy committee. He can speak to this a little better than I can. Last year, auctions for energy here in the state of Ohio and across our region in terms of who supplies us, very low per kilowatt. The most recent auction was, 20, 30 times higher?
It was 10 times higher.
10 times?
Still, 10 times is not acceptable.
Yes. So energy costs, starting over the summer, will skyrocket. And that's one of the reasons. There's many things that we can dive into a whole other town hall just on energy, is the lack of generation and the need for more actual power. So House Bill 15, big focus to try and generate more power in the state and the region. There is no exemption on property taxes for new power plants. Where one of the tax ideas to help incentivize power plants to be built here in the state, there's something called the tangible personal property tax for utilities. We all used to pay tangible personal property tax here in the state. That was eliminated. Now that will be placed on just utilities. Under House Bill 15, that will be removed from new plants and put on distribution to encourage new plants being built. So the tax would still be there, it would just be moved to a different portion of it. So we wouldn't be exempting, we wouldn't be removing any taxes, it's just shifting it to try to encourage new plants to come here. So we're not exempting power plants before we touch seniors by any means, just for that third point. Now, there are a lot of questions.
I have a question. I was looking at that CUP report also, and the troubling thing I have is per districts and stuff, it's like 80 to 85% of the money that goes through a new levy is going for salaries and benefits. 80 to 85%. So we're paying all this extra in property taxes, and then there was another column for other, which it just said other, which maybe 10%, and then it said for actual supplies and that for the kids, it was like 2 to 4%. All right, so this is the problem I have. Why am I paying so much for property taxes when that money isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing? All we hear is that, it's for the kids, That's a bunch of bullshit. It's for salaries and benefits. That's where it's going to. And that's something that I think the state representatives have to hone in on, right?
So on that piece, my very first term back in 2011, I added a budget amendment, which was successfully included that time around, House Bill 153, to require every district in the state to report on its ratio of administrative versus classroom or instructional expenditures, just to begin to get our arms wrapped around the problem that you're poking at, which is an important one. It's only gotten worse since then. Now, this is still a part. I just ran back to Legislative Service Commission a couple weeks ago to ask if that's still in permanent law. It is. And my follow-up on that is going to be to see at the state level sort of where we are. Because we know, both anecdotally and statistically around the country, that the percentage has really skyrocketed on the administrative side of things, not so much on the teacher side or the student side. And that's really the key issue there. I want to take a look at how we carve back the piece that's going, all on the administrative side of things. And really that's about structure. But as David's pointed out on a couple of occasions already, it's a shared local state arrangement that we have on schools and a bunch of other things from a policy perspective in the state. And so it's really incumbent upon all of us, and I encourage you, reach out to your local boards of education, ask the tough questions about why the dollars are flowing so much into extra assistant principals and you name the administrative position. I don't even know what they all are, as opposed to driving the dollars into instructional expenditures in the classroom. That's my answer to that.
I will say, though, too, that we are partially at fault as a legislature. So there are certain mandates, there are certain things that we put, and the federal government, Now, hopefully, the federal government side, we'll see what happens with that. But at the state side, what are certain mandates that we're having teachers do or administrators do? And that's one of the grills. That is a big portion of the education committee this year. Will be essentially, what can we take away from local schools that will help lower those costs, and not have just some person doing some report in that piece. Over the years, we've added many things, which are good things, but those are then unfunded that they add at the administrative level.
And I did ask, but just so you all know, I sat down about a month ago with all 5 of my superintendents and treasurers for the school districts in this legislative district. And we had our usual kind of conversation on this about the funding formula and so forth. And I pushed back on them and said, exactly what you were talking about, Representative, the issues that are coming down from the federal level and from the state level. And I said, if you could have a completely blank canvas in terms of what these policies are, what would that look like? And I have to tell you, I got a lot of blank stares back, right? And that's not to push it back on them completely, but I'm just telling you, there's too much willing acceptance and lack of critical thinking and pushback at the local level about how we address these kinds of things, and just more of a ready willingness to point the finger at the state level about these things, which is not to absolve us from responsibility at all. It's shared in this state. But we have a bias through our history that goes back over 200 years for local control memo. And we really can start to address these things in a meaningful way by working through local council, school board, other local levels of government to ask the tough questions and to say, if you could have this a different way. And I was asking them to just be imaginative and from my level, what can I push up to the federal level to say, hey, we don't need that. I asked about testing even. The testing regime that we have in the country today is onerous, to understate it. Right? I mean, when we were growing up, it was Iowa Basic, a couple of others, and you had them periodically throughout your career growing up. It's much more regular now. It's much more expensive, and as a result, you've got a lot of teaching to the test, as they say, that not only places a burden on teachers themselves, but I'm convinced takes away from actual classroom instruction time to teach critical thinking skills and to allow them to actually be good, productive citizens after they complete their education process.
In the back, you have your hand up.
Yes, I think it's important when we tell people numbers to tell them what it means. And Representative Thomas is exactly correct about the lottery. The $1 billion, if we took all state lottery money, we couldn't even fund Cleveland Public Schools. Cleveland Public School District budget is $1.5 billion. We couldn't even fund Cleveland with the lottery money. So I think that's important to note. I also work in Medina County where we have a sales tax for the schools. We have a 0.5% sales tax that funds buildings. To give you an idea of what that money is, it's about $18.5 million that funds 7 school districts. So each district gets about $2.5 million from a sales tax of 0.5%, which is a lot of money. But when you look at just Brunswick, which is a smaller school district than even what we have in Cuyahoga County, that represents less than 1% of their budget. Right. So when we look at it, we say, hey, we need. And I'm somebody that's for sales tax and income tax funding schools. But when you look at 0.5% funding 1% of a pretty normal suburban school district, you get to a level where it's 10-15%, and you go, what's the trade-off here? But Mike, I think it's important, the Ohio checkbook and some of the stuff that the legislature's done. I would say, honestly, Joe, exactly what you're talking about the administration costs. I think we should see every school district in the state. I think the legislature should make them put every single budget line item in front of you so that when you see your property tax bill, you can see exactly what you're funding. We had in Parma, Doris, how many years ago? 5 years ago, they said we're going from 9 administrators down to 3 administrators. Well, they added 2 more, so they actually went down to 5, and they paid the administrators the exact same amount of money. You're not doing anything. We don't need 3 curriculum directors in every school district. And I applaud Brady Midpark. A lot of people hated it when it happened, but it's been good for this area to combine those schools. That's what we need to look into. There is an apex when you look at the amounts of kids that are in each district where it's too many kids and too little kids, right? We need to look at them and we need to be innovative. We need to say, hey, we need to give different credits to different people. We have to innovate or we're going to have this problem.
Brandon, thanks for that. I'll just make one follow-up on that. So when we introduced what we called our Open Ohio bill back in 2011, 2012. We introduced it 3 times, never got all the way through, got to a fight between the treasurer and the office of the governor about who would actually house that online, what's now known as ohiocheckbook.gov. It did finally get enacted into statute 2 budgets ago in House Bill 210 in the 134th General Assembly. My follow-up on that this session is, and local organizations, local governments can participate permissively in the system right now, but the next step on that is where Brandon's going, and that's to require local government to do the same thing for full transparency at the local level. Since we have so much reliance on local government in this state, again, based on our history and just the structure that's accreted over more than 200 years, much of it that happens is at the local level. If we're not getting a look at the checkbook and look behind the scenes at how our dollars are being spent locally, we're missing a huge part of how our tax dollars are spent in the state.
Yeah. So structurally, because I get a lot of questions on this. So when we say they're going to work on targeted bills outside of the budget, the intent is though to pass those targeted bills and get them into the budget before June.
So the goal will be actually not to have policy like this in the budget. The budget should be the budget. Now there will be likely several bills that are property tax related in the budget because there's going to be appropriations attached to it. So for example, homestead is something that we all know we have to do much better at. Auditors have been saying, I know. I would have those people come into our office, I would help them with the application myself, and then I would feel so bad when they would ask, well, how much is this going to save me? And then, 1, I would tell them, well, we can't really tell you. 2, I would have to remind them that actually your savings decreases every year. And then 3, because of the qualifications, sometimes we couldn't even help to save. So there's a variety of different approaches that we're going to take to homestead. We'll see which one the actual caucus will get around. I'm testifying on Wednesday on my kind of approach, which would be to remove the aspect of it being tied to value. With it being tied to value right now in that exemption, even though it's actually increased for the first time since 2007 last year, seniors saw a decrease in their savings. And we can take a step back. That's because values increased much higher than what tax rates decreased. And so when you apply a lower tax rate to a slightly higher value, you're actually getting less savings. So that aspect itself has to change.
But if okay, yeah, let's get off homestead because to me it's worthless in its current form. But
Yep, I agree. It's just
so,
one idea.
Yeah, it's worthless. Okay, so but if I've gone through this for 3 cycles now. When I talk to Tom Patton, I get the same runaround every 3 years. If it's not in the budget, it's not gonna do anything. Is that correct?
No. So I would. Last year, I would have said even if things were in the budget, I'd be careful about what would actually happen. This year, this is like one of the things. So this is something that the Senate knows we have to do, the House knows we have to do, and these are things that we will be passing. You'll be seeing actual votes happening shortly. Literally, we are introducing bills as soon as our drafting is done with them.
But if it's not in the budget and there's this shortfall, how do you pay for these things in 2027?
So most of them will not actually be appropriation. So homestead is one thing where the state will be chipping in more, and we'll have to budget for that. But ideas like actually allowing a budget commission to decrease tax rates at the local level, that doesn't cost any state money. Things like changing how emergency levies are done with schools, that doesn't cost.
So really, so really the bills you're looking at that don't affect any kind of decreases in funding. Okay, so if there's no freeze on property taxes for people 65 and over, correct? I mean that would cause a decrease in funding, correct? If you're going to freeze my property tax, that's going to and if it's not in the budget,
Actually, no. So it could be done in a handful of ways, but more than likely how that would have to happen to be compliant, we would treat it like CAUV. So a CAUV, that's a credit. CAUV, current agricultural use valuation.
Okay.
That's a savings that farmers receive. Significant savings. Now, the state does not chip in any money for that savings, that credit. What actually happens is those values are decreased tremendously, and it's offset then by higher tax rates, and it's paid for by everyone else in the district. So if we were to, for example, freeze more than likely how it would have to work is that, yes, folks over 65 would not pay more. That difference would then come from the rest of the property owners in that district. Yes, question.
Somebody has to pay the bill, is what he's saying.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I understand what's going to happen. So my last question, because I believe is, what kind of pressure are you guys putting on Matt Huffman to actually bring bills to the floor? Because he didn't do anything last year, and this is your responsibility to get the Republicans to bring it to the floor. So if it's not brought to the floor this session again, I can guarantee you, you're all going to be primary.
I think you need to understand this. The House is broken.
Not our problem, Mike. Not our problem.
Can I explain to you though? Because you're
Yeah.
asking about Speaker Huffman.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if the House of Representatives isn't going to pass anything that the Senate sends our way in the 135th, the last 2 years, it doesn't matter. Right? So I'm going to hang this completely around the neck of Speaker J.C. Stevens and his inability to get anything done in the last 2 years because it is the illegitimate way that he became Speaker. Matt Huffman has a completely different approach to this. It's based on what the caucus wants. It's based on what the members of the House as a whole want. And so you're going to see action on this, right? I mean, it's a completely different scenario this time. And it's unfair and it's disingenuous to say that because Matt Huffman was president, nothing happened last time, when it had nothing to do with that chamber acting or not acting on it. It was completely a dysfunctional House of Representatives. I actually can tell you, from 6 years in a functional House, between 11 and 16, things get done when there's leadership that says we're going to get things
We'll
done.
see this then. I mean, and again, and I had this discussion a couple months ago.
Yeah,
The
and I told you the same thing then.
dysfunctionality in Columbus is not our problem. That's your all problem to fix that, okay?
And that part's been
So
fixed.
we'll see.
I actually
That part's been
primaried
fixed.
my predecessor for that exact reason.
Right.
As I did in this district.
Right.
Ran against the
The
person.
other guy who won this primary, that'd have been a vote for J.C. Stevens still.
So we've
Right. These things, you ask about it, so I'm going to give you the politics on it. Leadership matters. It's different leadership.
So you keep talking about $1 million from the Ohio lottery.
Yep.
But how much is the revenue every year from the Ohio lottery, and where's the rest of the money go? Or is that all the revenue?
I think that's pretty much straight. So they'll cover costs, and then essentially everything goes towards. There's, I think there's like some aspect with if you go to a VFW hall and they have the electronic, things. Those don't necessarily go to the same as the Ohio lottery, but it all typically, on the lottery side, cover
So all
costs.
profit goes.
Yep.
Yeah, we can give you more exact figures. I just sat with Nick Ciapani yesterday to get an update on the lottery. Didn't talk specifically about what those dollar amounts are or how it works, but I believe the representative's right. It flows directly to it after cost, after expenses are paid for.
Yes.
Brian Massey, lobbyist for Citizens. We've been looking at the CUP reports for many, many, many years. And what we have noticed is that they've taken away the actual count of number of teachers. They've got the count of administrators, but then they have columns that says we've got teachers that are less than 5 years, 5 to 10. Why did they take away the actual count of the teachers? And my second question has to do with Budget Commission. I know Representative Thomas knows about this one, but I am extremely concerned. In Lake County, I go to the Budget Commission meetings. Well, I understand we're supposed to be the watchdog for the taxpayers. When these taxing authorities send in their tax budget, we're getting nothing more than a rubber stamp. So what has happened is in Lake County, in 10 years, the government has grown, the property taxes to pay for our government services has grown 33%, $508 million, and I am concerned that the government in Lake County is outgrowing the private sector's ability to pay for the services. So how do we get a budget commission that can be the watchdog for the taxpayers on these schools or any of the taxing authorities? Somebody's got to challenge them when they submit a budget. It's not being done.
I think we're going to call that bill the Brian Massey bill. And that's being drafted right now. So what Brian's talking about at the county level, as Representative Dovilla said, a lot of this is local. At the county level, there's actually an entity called the Budget Commission. It's made up of the auditor, the treasurer, and currently the prosecutor. And what those three entities and offices do is essentially they approve every single local government budget that it touches property taxes. So over the summer, entities will send in their budget, they'll look at how much revenue, how much expenditures, and one of the big problems in Lake County is the example of this. Entities will continue to place levies on the ballot, sharing need, but then in reality, they have a really high cash carryover in their banks. And so they don't actually need the tax money coming in that they're supposed to be serving the people with. And so in some counties, Lake County is the prime example, the county does not believe, the prosecutor does not believe, that the Budget Commission has the authority to actually look over the budget and do what we did in Ashtabula, which was decrease entities' tax rates if they did not need that revenue for essential services for the following year. About half the counties in the state believe they do not have that authority. The other half believe they do, but they really rarely use it. So one of the bills that will be introduced, it's a bigger one, so it's taking more time, will be essentially to empower, directly in black and white, Budget Commission authorities and essentially force, if entities have carryovers that are in excess, public hearings with the Budget Commission to explain, are they saving money for a building, for example? Are they planning for something down the road? Or are they simply just stockpiling more dollars while still asking for levies? And should we be then decreasing tax rates? Ideally, we should have the ability, and this happened in Geauga as well, when there are unvoted increases in tax revenue from revaluations, that should be offset with tax decreases on the voted levies. If you have a strong budget commission, you have the ability to have those conversations because you can actually decrease the tax rates. When you don't have,
That's through the county?
yes. When you don't have a strong budget commission, as what happens in Lake, there's no incentive then for entities to not decrease their tax rates as they're bringing in more revenue. So that will be.
Just describe HB 920.
So, you know your history. So House Bill 920, that's the idea that most of the levies that we vote on, and there's always exceptions, it's not like the English language, property taxes are. The levies that we vote on, most of them, when you're actually voting at the ballot box, you're voting for a set amount of revenue coming in. So if you're voting for a township road levy, you're telling the township, you can collect in $1 million every year for this road levy. As years go on, your values will increase. And prior to House Bill 920, which was passed during the 70s in our last inflationary boom, prior to that, you voted on that levy, and that tax rate was always applied to your rising value. And that was causing higher taxes. So what House Bill 920 said was, we're going to cap the revenue of that voted levy, and despite however high your value goes up, the township, the entity, will always receive in that same amount. So as your value goes up, the tax rate actually goes down. That's for most of the levies on your ballot and on your tax bill. But that's not all of the levies on your tax bill. There are exceptions, which include bond levies. If you voted for a bond levy for a fire truck, for example, or for a school building, those do not automatically decrease. They cannot collect in more than what the total bond is for the debt payment, but those do not automatically decrease. There are also currently exceptions for something called emergency levies at the school district level. An emergency levy is passed if in 5 years there's a deficit being projected for the school. Voters can pass that levy. That brings in the same relatively tax rate amount. They should be decreased, but currently they're not able to. Those are two examples of voted levies that would not necessarily decrease as values increase. The non-voted levy aspects, one is called inside millage. Inside millage is something, think about before we even, I know, you're fine. Inside millage is something before we even started voting on levies. Every single property in the state has 10 mills, or 1% of the value, assessed to it. That 1% of the value in tax assessment, the revenue from that is shared among all of the different local entities that that property is sitting in. So of the 10 mills, or 1%, maybe 4 mills goes to the county, 3 mills goes to the state, and the rest goes to the township or to the village. That 1% of inside millage, that is applied directly to your value. So as your value goes up, that 1% tax rate stays with it. Always is applied to it. So House Bill 920 does not decrease the tax rate as values go up for inside management. So then the second way is something called the 20 mil floor with schools. Every school district in the state is guaranteed to receive 20 mils, or 2% of the value in the district in revenue. 20 years ago, most districts were way above 20 mils in tax rate. Voters approved levies. Levies were full in terms of their collection. They may have been much higher than 20 mils or 2% of tax rate for the district. Fast forward to today, as values have gone up, tax rates have gone down, and now almost 500 of our 612 or so school districts receive less than 20 mils or 2% of the guaranteed tax rate. And so what happens when, let's say, one of my school districts, they have been voted in 13 mils, or 1.3% of the tax rate. Well, they're guaranteed 20 mils, or 2%. And so we have to then apply the difference to people's property values as they go up. So the voters voted in 13, they're guaranteed 20. That difference, the 7 mils, is applied as values go up. And so that is the other reason. Now, you all here in Cuyahoga, that is much more of a rural issue. Of the schools that are below the 20 mil floor, 95% of them are rural. In more urban areas, typically, the tax rate is higher, and that is not a concern for you all. I don't know exactly the schools here, but those are the two unvoted reasons why your tax amount would increase as your value increases without you actually voting on your levies. You had a second question.
See if I can remember it after all of that. No, it had to do with the valuation. Why is it that when you purchase a property 30 years ago, that value doesn't stick with you to sell the property?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I know that's something that's being discussed.
Unrealized.
So, yep.
Unrealized.
So that is the California model, essentially. When you buy a home in California, that sale price is the price then you apply the tax rate to for as long as you're there. There's great things with that. If you're not, and people have heard me talk, I try to be as blunt as possible. If you're grandma and you bought that 30 years ago, grandma will have that same value applied, and then as tax rates get added on or whatever happens, it goes. The problem is, and upside downside, if you're not grandma and you're Bob and Betty and you just moved in and got married and it's your first home right next door, you bought the home, grandma may be paying on a value of $50,000. Bob and Betty are paying on a value of maybe $200,000. And Bob and Betty then are getting quite the heavier burden placed on them as new home buyers. And all that is shifted onto those who are participating in the market right now. Now, upside to that is that they know what that price is, and they know the tax amount. Downside to it, one of the biggest reasons that we have the market, the real estate that we do right now, is a supply and demand issue. And if we're putting all of that burden onto new home buyers, either new construction or new home buyers, then you're highly disincentivizing people from entering the market. That's one. Two, grandma, and we all want people to stay in their homes. We don't want people to have to. Let's say grandma does want to move and downsize. Then grandma now becomes the Bob and Betty by night. That's downside. Yes.
Okay, so, yeah, but. Okay.
It's always a but.
So, well, here's the thing. Pretty soon, in another 30 years, they'll be grandma. And that's how that kind of works, and I don't see that it you can say that, and how so? Because people are still going to want to own their own homes. I mean, if there's homes available, people are still going to own their home. I mean, it just kind of rolls forward. Back when I did, that's kind of how it was. When I bought my home at $76,000, holy cow, that was, when I bought my home back then, that's kind of how it went. Sort of values stayed pretty much in line with where you bought it, how much you paid when you bought it. And then things creeped up, and that really started in the early 2000s. things really started creeping up. I don't, call me crazy, I don't really buy into that argument that it's gonna affect the housing market because it is as it is when you go in. I hear that a lot where it's gonna disincentivize, that's a popular term. I don't think so, because it didn't disincentivize me to pay $76,000 for my home when somebody else was paying $20,000. You know what I mean? Because they bought it 30 years ago or $25,000. So, I think that kind of, I take umbrage with that statement.
Totally fair. I think you said
So kind of attached to that is, so you have a lot of neighborhoods, especially in like East Cleveland and Lower West Side, where a lot of houses have been demolished, okay, and they got ran down during when the housing market was real bad. A lot of new developments coming in. All these houses that are the new developments, they're getting these huge 10, 15-year tax abatements. And I know we kind of discussed this, and I forgot how many billions of dollars in the state of Ohio, more than that.
$43 billion is what the tax is.
So $43 billion you have going into new development in neighborhoods that these people are coming in with families, okay, and everybody else around them is eating that cost. Meanwhile the developer runs to the bank laughing, and the people stay there. And a good example is Ohio City. Okay, you have a lot of people that have bought homes there when they were doing that new development. People that have houses like hers that were selling for $77,000 now have neighbors that are selling houses for $370,000. But they stayed in them until the tax abatements were over, and then they sold and they got out of town. So so that is a huge problem in itself. Just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, so there's two, and he's exactly right. There's two aspects to that. The first one is, going back to Devilla's comment about local control. We as a legislature do not place the abatements or those types of things on properties. We've given the tools to local entities to decide what do you want in your area and what would you like to be able to incentivize for properties in your area. And I think that it's very easy to say there's an abuse of it's called CRAs, or those types of abatements. We try to encourage new housing developments, but to your point, housing development, families move in, they've got kids go to the school has more expense. Housing development, though, is not contributing to the school's funding, and then what happens? So everyone else has to pick up. But they would argue, from a city perspective, there's no other way to incentivize this home building than to have the abatements. Now, I would say we're in a supply and demand off-kilter argument right now in terms of the market. So we have huge demand. People are moving to Ohio. It's a really good thing. Our supply is very low. It's actually dwindling because we're demolishing more homes. This is a market sitting there right now. And so we will be looking at, and that will be extraordinarily popular, but we will be looking at essentially pulling back some of the abatement authority because it's gotten way too big. And here's another kicker. You're in a school district. School district allows for an abatement, for example, of one property here, but you're in the city. Abated property is in the township. Well, abated property does not have the taxes applied to it from the school district, from the library, from all the entities that you're being taxed on, we don't actually have say over. And then you're picking up the extra burden from a property that's not in there. And unfortunately, those folks that have 100% abatement are still able to vote on levies. But you have all
Yes, I had one other part. So the other part of this problem is a lot of the, practically almost all of the houses that are being built, these aren't average houses. They're all luxury type houses. Okay, we don't see no $150,000 new house. No, they're $275,000, $350,000, $400,000 homes. You're not going to see average first-time home buyers jumping into something like that, especially with the interest rates right now. What we need to see is, especially like in a lot of local municipalities, is if they're going to be building new housing, build something that's realistic. But that's not happening here, and they're still, those big houses are still getting those huge tax breaks. So I mean, this is just, it's really messing with the system in regards to generating tax revenue and keeping everything moving as it should.
Yes, but be careful. In Ashtabula County, for example, big swath of open land. A developer wants to come in and build, what's the keyword? Affordable workforce housing. When people hear that, though, What do you think? Some people, yes, people, I've never seen more folks in a public hearing. Now, was it Section 8? No. Did the developers, was it safe? No.
Was it affordable?
Yeah, well,
Marty, yeah,
yeah.
That's where it becomes.
So we have to, as a community, attempt to incentivize what we need. But we as legislature have allowed communities that leeway and an ability to have the tools of what they would like. And the community obviously is going to say, we would love to have people coming in paying high income tax and debate them for a little while, and then they'll pay the full property tax. Yes, you.
That whole concept. Yet I've lived in many states, new developments, and a couple of them. You find a house you like, you buy. If people are moving into Ohio because of jobs, because obviously what you described, these are not like, one bathroom, 2-bedroom homes. It would never have entered my mind to not have to pay taxes on that. Why? Why would we do that, period? If developments, I've heard, I want to move to Vermillion, but I want to be in the downtown, the rural downtown, but they're building huge developments there. People want to move to Vermillion. They want to be in Erie County where everything is less expensive. They're building beautiful, huge homes. Those people can afford to buy them. And all the kids are hurt. The families who are trying to pay their property taxes because they're 80 years old and they've owned their house and they don't have the income. And you got all these new gorgeous developments. That's stealing. And the state is allowing it. And that's the part I don't get. All those developments, those people can, it never entered my mind. In the new houses that we built, in the states we lived in, I never heard of that in the state of New Jersey or the state of Arizona. You bought the house. And some people took care of their houses. They were, nobody expected to have. It's embarrassing.
Next question.
Yeah, I would just caution, I completely understand what you're saying about disincentivizing, but if you look at those developments down there in Ohio City and Tremont places, they're having a hard time selling them right now because the tax abatements are gone. So to say that there's no incentive to go get that house when the tax bill is 10 times what it was when it was $100, I think there is a disincentive to when you abate or when you freeze a property tax and then you unfreeze it. There is a disincentive. We're seeing it right now. That's why people are not buying those properties. They're not renting those.
So, well, the reason.
But here's the thing: do we pay the burden? I mean, do we pay their freight? I mean, because basically that's what happens is we end up paying their freight if they're getting an abatement. I mean, hold on here a second.
And that goes back to that local control aspect of when those votes come up.
There's one more part, which is the commercial tax abatements. Because in Lakewood, and we don't even have many commercial properties as it is, and most of them.
And remember that when we're talking about residential versus commercial, it's actually complicated money. Two different buckets of things. So that's why we typically focus on residential abatements in this conversation, because the commercial ones don't. But next question.
Why give these folks to begin with a tax abatement if they can afford a $500,000, $800,000 house? Okay, they're giving them a 15-year or a 10-year tax abatement. The next person that buys that house is going to be penalized. Why should we allow that? Why don't they have a bill in the Senate or something to disband the tax abatement period?
So the local city, village, and it looks like Representative Gosper has council experience.
If I could just throw in a little bit, until December, I was a councilman in North Olmsted. And I did that. I repealed for North Olmsted any more abatements on new things. We were taking 5 former elementary schools and turning them into housing developments because we consolidated to one. What happened? Developers spent $20,000 saying on ads saying I raised taxes. I survived it, but that's what happened. Yep.
Because people don't understand the process. They don't understand the process.
So that will be definitely a conversation to have with your local council folks, especially when those votes come up. asking what is the trade-off? What are we getting from this, but having to pay for this? And in your case, trade-off is pretty easy. Other areas, you have a question? He's been raising a question.
Oh,
I'm sorry, for a little while.
As far as these major developers, are they local? Are they within the state, within the county? Or do we have outside interests that are coming in to get these abatements, okay, and leave us on the hook for everything? And if so, why can't something be done about that?
So in our area, it was mainly local. Now you have small towns, more rural areas. I don't know if yours were mainly local or out of more local. That could be part of that aspect of, when cities decide on who to give abatements to, developers will always say the but-for clause. But for this abatement, would we be building? Typically they'll say no. But then that's up to the good work of local officials to be able to dive into, is this actually needed? Is there a strong demand here? And are there other incentives instead of property tax, income tax, for example? Could you give the homeowners of that home maybe a break on their income tax instead of property tax for X number of years? And then you're balancing, yes. So there's different questions and tools, but we've given, I think, the toolbox. We've probably given the toolbox mainly or more so than we should have. Does that make sense?
I still think that if you're buying a house, you have to afford it. You go to the bank, I'm building this house on this lot, and usually the farmers are the ones selling their land. That's what happens. But I shouldn't have to pay for a new development. I mean, my house is really old, and that was just really
So it was great to hear everything that everyone had, all the questions and the answers. But I'll give myself an example. What is someone to do? Live in Cuyahoga County. My taxes went up 30%. My property taxes, which I think is absurd. Mostly when I hear my brother 10, 15 minutes down from me, his taxes went down. Mm-hmm. What is someone to do in my situation with my taxes going up that high, which I think is ridiculous?
So the first recommendation I always have, and I would answer my own phone to the 2 weeks after tax bills hit, be on the phone the entire time answering that exact question. You build a relationship with people, it's important. So I would always ask first, do you believe the value of the property is roughly what you could sell your property for in today's market? That's always my first question. Because if it's not, then that's the easy offering. There's the appeal process. I would always make our appeal process pretty fun. I'd bake cookies and it'll be a good conversation and different things. Cuyahoga's probably a tad bit different, but there's that appeal process. If you think, though, that your value is relatively accurate for what you could sell your property for today, bluntly, that's firm. There is no appeal. There is no ability for you to change your tax bill right now. However, your action items moving forward, though, are to look at where all those actual tax amounts are going. Either go to those meetings, ask, because this is a dirty little secret. No entity had to accept those unvoted increases. Every entity that received those unvoted increases from you could have decided, as some did in Ashtabula, Geauga, Butler, others, to not have their tax rates stay so that they would bring in that unvoted increase. They could have decreased their tax rates. So you asking, what are you doing to your city council or your school board or whatever entity it is, what are you doing with the unvoted increase of dollars? Do you need that unvoted increase of dollars? Would you be willing to decrease the tax rate next year so that my tax bill can decrease because you don't need these unvoted dollars? That's, I think, action step number 2. And then number 3, we as voters, I think, have taken a back seat oftentimes when it comes to levies, when it comes to asking the questions about what some of the needs are. Now that's a voted increase, but those obviously will continue to increase. So those are my 3 for you. Some of the bills that we're working on in Columbus could help you. There's something called the owner occupancy credit. That's for people that live in their home, own it, one home. Right now that probably saves you $50. I think that type of direct help, we'll be testifying on Wednesday, that should be $750. So that would be something right away for next year. But other aspects that we're working on, either can be given the tools to the county to decrease certain rates, could give you more information when you go and vote on what you're actually voting on. And then depending on what your situation was, if there's the 20 floor aspect, if there's just inside millage, could be tampering that down too.
And how do I find that out based on how my taxes went up? How do I find out like how they based that 30%?
So you can call. I'm sure that Mike has a good number of folks at call centers. That's what I always recommend people doing is reach out to us. We can look up your property. We can tell you exactly what happened. You may have had new levies, for example, as well. I'm not sure why your brothers went down and yours went up. If they're in the exact same taxing district.
Well, he's in Medina County. I'm in County.
Oh, okay.
That's where we're moving to. Right, but his house is a lot more expensive than my house.
Yes.
But yet his went down.
Yes. So, and that's all based on what tax rates, what voters have approved here versus possibly there. To point back there of they may have sales tax for the school portion. You may have extra property taxes on your school portion to cover certain things too. So there is some balancing aspects. Move out to Dovilla, I can promise you we'll save you a lot of money.
Just by way of follow-up on the third piece that Representative Thomas was referring to, I'll point to my friends here in Strongsville, who on 3 occasions over the last 3 times that the levy was on the ballot, turned it back. And the reason they did that, were successful with it, is they organized, they funded the campaign, and they won. So it's about organizing and making noise at the local level. If you're unhappy with the local voted increases that are going into place, and then to the unvoted piece, the first time I heard about this when you and I talked about it, right? These are unbudgeted, unplanned for windfall payments, really, from taxes that are coming into local government. Ask the hard questions.
Just one quick piece before. Who would you say I would need to call?
So here in Cuyahoga, you're a little bit different. You're unified, so your fiscal agent, your fiscal officer for the county. Mike Chambers is the county.
Treasurer?
He's the treasurer / the auditor / the recorder / you guys are very different.
Mike Chambers?
Yes.
Hey, can I ask a quick question? I've been dying to say this. Now, we get the vouchers for public for private schools, like $7,500 or something. Is that what it is per kid, roughly?
Yeah. Well, it's now indexed to income, but yeah.
I'm just going to use that as an example, $7,500. So I'm just doing some numbers here. So like in Cleveland Heights, which is just, we have 5,000 kids, we pay 100, with their operating expenses are $125 million per year, okay? Why don't the state representatives come up with a plan that says, hey, they get $7,500 per kid, okay, which would be it would be $37.5 million. I know they'd be screaming holy hell, but that would cut right then and there. Boom, our property taxes are decreased by 70%. And why can't they, if the private schools can live on $7,500 per kid, why can't the public school?
So that's essentially what we did do back during the Duralf days, where we kind of covered every student roughly the same across the state. And essentially, constitutionally, for students like that, and bluntness, they're going to take more to educate because of maybe their background, maybe
That's
issues.
what I've heard from the Cleveland
Yes.
Heights, but that's their rhetoric.
But that's where Duralf came from.
Yeah.
Now, the voucher idea, typically your private schools can do it better, cheaper, faster. That's usually what they say. And so that amount then is essentially given to that private charter school for that student. There might be differences, or they might be able to actually educate that student for that number. But for us to have one kind of flat number per kid from the state revenue side, they're off.
And that's where the local.
That sounds like lobbyists intervening. That's what that sounds like.
But that's true, the private schools that get the $7,500, they're non-union, the teachers make less money. As a general rule, if the children don't behave, the principal says this is not the right school for you. The environments are totally different. Because my kids tried public school, we went private, and they were Catholic. And that was the rules. The teachers made less, but my kids would come home.
But I'm paying. See, here's the thing: I'm paying the teacher's salary. I don't care how much somebody makes, but when it's coming out of my pocket, then I do care. I do care a lot. So I'm looking to save some money here. I'm looking.
Well,
Yeah,
I wanted to try to get someone else to talk at.
So I'm grandma, right? North Olmsted. I'm involved with my friends in Strongsville. But my house, the property tax is $160,000 more. I am fighting all by myself. I'm not getting anywhere. My house is being compared to houses that are newly built. My house is from 1920 on a couple acres of land, but it is not. They are so inflating this thing, and I work very diligently at the arguments. I hire a guy, the appraisal, they ignore the appraisal. Where do I go? I submitted the next DTE
The
thing,
Board of
but
Tax
where
Appeals.
do I go? Because this isn't right. This is highway robbery. And I don't know. I am so frustrated, and I feel like I am being completely ripped off. And yeah, there are a lot of McMansions on my street, but that does not increase the value of my house. I cannot sell my house like somebody else would sell a brand new house just because I have the square footage. It is such a ripoff, and I am not getting to the right people. So what do I do? Where do I go?
So you've appealed to the county, the board.
Yeah, my hearing, I
That
haven't
was
heard when
denied.
the hearing is coming,
Okay.
and I've done hearings before. I mean, I've been in that house 25 years, and I have big square footage, so I go through this all the freaking
Yeah,
time.
yeah. 'Cause it's based on-
But now, they don't listen to you anymore. They used to listen to you, and they don't anymore. It's just a price tag, and they just want the money, and I'm sorry, they're like,
Yeah, so your avenue would be Board of Revision Board of Revision first.
Yeah.
That's your auditor, treasurer, and commissioner. Now in Cuyahoga, it's different. You guys you're organized differently, so frankly it's much less elected in terms of your representation on that board. If they disagree with your challenge, it sounds like they have in the past, you then have the ability to either take them to Common Pleas or to take them to the Board of Tax Appeals. Board of Tax Appeals is the entity, we just heard their budget on Wednesday. They are the last resort for taxpayers.
That's in Columbus?
Yes. Yep. So they hear complaints from the Board of Revisions of folks that do not agree with the Board of Revision complaint.
Yeah.
It's free. It's available to folks. And that is essentially the last kind of arbiter over the value piece. If you have an appraisal, if you have that information like you said you did, that would be the Board of Tax Appeals is the avenue for you.
and that's in Cuyahoga County?
No, so the Board of Tax Appeals is for the entire state. That's all they do, is they hear value complaints from the local level.